Yo. Yo! Yo! I know we're all riding that clair-obscur craze, and that's trending too is sweet Kojima stuff, but for my money, this here is my goatee. Am I biased because it's directed by one of my favorite writers, beautiful dreamy-eyed Kazutaka Kodaka, and the soundtrack is by my all-time favorite composer, beautiful dreamy birded Masafumi Takada? No, shut up! How can it exist? What angels from Weeb Heaven were summoned to make it real? What is this game? Well, it's a turn-based tactics, tower defense, RPG, grid-based explorative visual novel. Okay, that might be too confusing of a start, but where do I even begin to talk about it? From the beginning. The 100-line Last Defense Academy. Boy, that's a long title. I'll just refer to it as Tilda. Or Tilda. Tilda Swinton? Yeah, let's go with that. Tilda Swinton is the story of a band of children carefully selected to protect the Last Defense Academy in a 100 days long war against alien invaders. And if Evangelion has taught me anything at all, is that kids do great under the looming presence of death. If you're not familiar with Evangelion, you can refer to the wiki page for the Vietnam War. So we get all the usual character archetypes. The tech-savvy type who could craft a nuke using wet paper, the lovable heart of gold kind of guy whose lines are ripped off the pages of Mr. Rogers' diary, the manic pixie girl who constantly reminds us how cool it would be if this was a killing game. Kinda like that other series, what's it called, Dangling Grandpas or something. And let's not forget the slightly incestuous twins, and the girl who has intercourse with her sword. Jesus Christ, that's an actual sentence I just wrote. Now, I have a personal theory that Kodaka purposefully writes characters you'd hate to be around for more than 2 minutes. They're all tremendously eccentric stereotypes of everything that is anime, and while funny to look at, you know you'd feel safer spending your weekend at the Arkham Asylum, but it's all in service to their characterization. It's fascinating to see the cast develop from apparently vapid and caricatural personas into more complex and relatable people. She's actually very sweet once you get to know her. The writing constantly teeters the line between slice-of-life comedy and despair-filled tragedy in a crescendo of twists and subversion of expectations at each passing day, and that same love for subversion is brought into the battles, because, as I sadly expected, they're actually... good? The combat system is simple, easy to learn, but impressively satisfying. I genuinely loved it, and it's even more impressive when you consider it was about to be completely removed until an ex-Persona developer completely redesigned the whole thing at the 100th hour. And can we please give some respect to the battle intro cutscene?
Is that a vagina on his forehead?
Each character has a very distinct toolset at their disposal, and I had so much fun trying to come up with ways to clear the enemy forces in a single turn, and when push comes to shove, you can always die! That's an actual mechanic. If a character's HP drops to critical levels, they can sacrifice themselves to execute a super move. But don't feel bad, they canonically respawn in the next wave using their sci-fi revive-o-matic thing. Just in case the whole lambs to the slaughter metaphor didn't get through the thickest of skulls. Oh well, I'm sure they'll be fine. See, she's happy. And so will be her psychiatrist. But I love when gameplay mechanics play off the central themes of the story, which should be a given for a video game, but nowadays the focus is all on expensive cutscenes, so this stuff qualifies as rare breed in my book. Although, it is hard to make me feel bad about the brutality of war when the music bops so hard.
務めさせてもらうよ。少しは役に立てたかな。行くぜ。粘るね。
A message to our overlords in government. If you wanna convince me to enlist in the army, just put this man in charge of the soundtrack. But since we're on the subject of rare breed, it's just as uncommon to see how tight each gameplay element is tied to one another. To fight advanced battles, you need to upgrade the cast's abilities, but those are locked behind a persona-style stats check, and in order to advance those, you need to hang out with the other little psychopaths, and in doing so you learn what they like, which means you can now build gifts for them, which in turn will improve your stats faster. But to make gifts, you need crafting items, and those can only be found roaming outside the school, and see, it's all connected in a beautiful little package where you need to squeeze the most out of the free time you get before unescapable horrors befall the cast. My only problem here is that I can't show how serious the story can get without spoiling it, which leaves me with just the comedy parts. And listen, I'm baby. I hear a fart, I laugh. Dick jokes, funniest shit ever. Sexy stuff, pinnacle of comedy, which makes Kodaka's writing right up my alley, because it's always consciously over the top. But for normal, boring people, it means having to deal with a lot of this, and 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 all I'm saying is, in case you don't vibe with this style, be a better person? I don't know, seems like a you problem. Tilda is a wild ride, and 30 hours later, once you hit the credits, you can joyfully pat yourself on the back. Cause you just finished the prologue, boy.
And let me try the remix.
No, helly no. It's time for a redo. Turns out, you've seen maybe a fourth of the entire game, and this is where things really go bananas. That 100 line in the title actually referred to the amount of cocaine the writer snorted to make this game. Your 100 days are rewinded, and your path to the 100 endings opens up by giving you the power of choice. And this is not a gimmick, it's the core of the game. Each decision capable of completely changing the course of events in the most dramatic ways. Impossible conundrums, infinite possibilities. Can you pick the path that will lead you to a happy ending? This is actually a very important branching decision. I realize that it sounds like I'm hyping up what ultimately boils down to a choose-your-own-adventure kind of game, but listen. These routes on screen are maybe 20% of the possible options you have. Kodaka and his buddy Uchikoshi treated common sense like the Russians treat their oligarchs.
Have a nice flight.
They didn't ask themselves if they should do it. They went balls to the wall and created an everything story. Horror, comedy, romance.
It has a little something for everyone.
There's even a route that is all about stereotypical shonen power of friendship tropes, which was written by the ex-Persona dude, so you know, it all came full circle. Every branching path leads to the most unexpected situations, but they all coexist and bounce upon each other. One route might answer questions brought up in another. Characters that previously didn't get enough screen time, or worse, got killed too soon, now get an entire narrative branch focused on them. It's a massive puzzle with a breadcrumb trail scattered around its web of different timelines. You can follow a guide to go straight into the main second scenario route, which has exclusive ownership over some of the biggest revelations, but playing Tilda completely blind and getting immersed in its world and cast creates a much stronger emotional connection to the story, and my god, it pays off exquisitely. The downside is that when I said every route is linked, I meant literally every single route, which leads to potentially reaching this point,
これからもおめえと一緒にいてって言ったら
which is then followed by one of the biggest plot twists of the game, and then immediately going back to this. Sorry. That was the effect that tone shift had on my vocal cords. It's not perfect in its execution, but that level of unpredictability is what makes it unique. It's an experiment in video game storytelling with tons of different writers, each bringing their own flavor into the mix to create the most impressive literary work by committee since the Bible. Too much? Well, at the very least, a way more engaging one. But, like all experiments, you have to deal with some of its mess afterwards, like having one branch completely discarding the pre-established characterization of some members of the cast. Hey, not all endings are made equal. Even they say it. It's frankly surprising that this happens in just 2 routes, especially when things get absolutely mental. 100 Line is big and beautiful, to the point it almost bankrupted the development company itself. Maybe even too big for it so good. By the 50 hours mark, battles don't pose a challenge anymore, and even though a brand new difficulty option has been added, the combat system doesn't evolve any further, along with the fact that most fights are shared between the various routes, to the point the game gives you the option to skip them once you clear them once. Remember how I was glazing over the tight package earlier? Well, now it's a bit mangled on the side. If you can skip battles, you don't really need to upgrade gear, which means you don't need to craft gifts for your friends unless you want to get some extra dialogues with them, which means you don't need to explore. And by hour 80, the entire gameplay structure becomes a shell of its former self, leaving only the branching paths and visual novel take full, complete centerpiece. Is it really a problem? Yesn't? If you got to the 80 hours mark, you're clearly invested enough to continue, and Tilda is still, first and foremost, a visual novel. But I can't help but wonder if trimming the scope of the project by a smudge in order to flesh out the combat portion a bit more would have made the experience even better. But hey, experiments, remember? Untamed artists create the weirdest, most beautiful games, not necessarily perfect ones.
It's a small price to pay.
But if the idea of reading a book for 170 hours feels a bit too much of a commitment, you can always just decide to leave the alternate routes whenever you want. Just focus on the main second scenario, because it's not just the best stuff Kodaka has ever written. It's genuinely fantastic. It's a story that paints each character with different shades of grey. Villains have credible motivations, and heroes deal with their own weaknesses and egoistical impulses. There's no attempt at justifying the events and vile acts committed throughout, but rather the blunt and tragic reminder that behind the quirky cast, the funny mascots, the upbeat music, and the overflowing sex jokes, this is still a story about war, its psychological toll, the sacrifices people are ready to make to survive, and how steep the price of righteousness can be. In those 170 hours, there was laughter, there was mystery, and a lot of emotional train wreck. All that made my 100 days at the Last Defense Academy truly unforgettable. And how am I saying this about a game that contains the line "your curry tastes like poop from a butt"?